It started the day I moved into the old apartment on Crenshaw Street, a crumbling, forgotten building wedged between a pawn shop and a shuttered laundromat, the kind of place where the air smells of mildew and stale cigarette smoke even before you open the door. The landlord, an old man with a permanent scowl and cracked glasses, handed me the keys with a warning I didn't heed. Watch the mirror in the hallway. It's different. I laughed at the absurdity. Of course, mirrors aren't sentient, and I was tired from hauling boxes and furniture, ready to collapse into normalcy. That night, after unpacking, I noticed it, a tall, ornate mirror leaning against the wall at the far end of the hallway, a relic from another era, the frame carved with curling tendrils and unidentifiable figures that seemed almost alive in the dim light. When I looked into it, my reflection was accurate, exactly as it should be, but there was something else, subtle, that I couldn't place. My reflection blinked before I did once, and the corner of its mouth twisted in a way mine hadn't. I chalked it up to exhaustion, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Over the next few days, I started noticing discrepancies. My reflection would linger in the hallway when I had already moved into another room. It would be smiling when I was not. Its eyes seemed too sharp, too aware. I began avoiding the hallway at night. But sleep was impossible. Shadows seemed to slink along the walls when I closed my eyes, and I would wake in a cold sweat to the sound of faint laughter echoing metallic somewhere between human and wrong. One morning, I woke to find a single note slipped between the mirror and the wall. Look closer. I hesitated, then slowly approached the mirror. My reflection looked back, but it wasn't just me. It was me in the apartment, but slightly off. The room was darker, the furniture shifted, and there was someone standing behind me, impossibly tall, with a face entirely hidden in shadows. I spun around, of course, and no one was there. Panic gripped me, and I tried to cover the mirror, drape it with blankets, but each night it returned to its position, impervious to tape or nails. I began noticing small changes. Objects in my apartment slightly rearranged, strange scratches on the walls, a low, persistent hum that seemed to emanate from the mirror itself. I told friends, but no one could see anything unusual. They laughed at my paranoia. It became worse after a week. The reflection started moving independently. I could be sitting at my desk, staring at the screen, and the figure in the mirror would gesture, sometimes waving, sometimes mimicking actions I wasn't doing. It smiled more often, a slow, insidious grin that chilled me to the bone. One evening, desperate, I touched the mirror's surface, and the glass rippled like water. My hand slipped in as if it were liquid, and a scream erupted from me. My voice, but distorted, echoing endlessly in the apartment. I pulled back, bruised my knuckles, but the reflection didn't mimic my recoil. It stepped forward, and I swear, in that instant, its eyes locked with mine, and a flicker of awareness passed between us, as though it recognized me, and I it. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly, the days blending into nights, my friends' voices distant and hollow. I began hearing whispers, low murmurs that seemed to emanate from the mirror, whispering secrets, threats, promises, things I couldn't fully understand but that made my skin crawl. Then came the shadows, not just my own, but other shapes flickering at the edges of my vision, always near the mirror, stretching and writhing as if attempting to escape. I tried moving the mirror, throwing in the bathtub, burying it under old blankets, but the next morning it would be back in the hallway, pristine and waiting. I started keeping a journal, trying to track patterns, but the pages would smear overnight, words replaced with strange symbols, scratching noises filling the apartment when I tried to decipher them. One night, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate, while I was in the living room. I froze, heart hammering, and glanced at the mirror. My reflection was gone. Panic surged. I ran to the hallway, and there it was again, but not alone. My double stood beside something that shouldn't exist. A figure hunched over, skeletal, faceless, with arms impossibly long, touching the floor. My reflection reached out toward me, as if to warn me, but the thing behind it moved too fast, slamming against the glass with a sound like breaking bone. I screamed, bolted from the apartment, spent the night in a 24-hour diner, trying to convince myself I was losing it. When I returned, the apartment was empty. No mirror, no traces of the shadow figure, nothing. Relief washed over me, temporary, until I noticed the faint outline on the hallway wall where the mirror had been, as if it were waiting to reappear. I avoided the apartment for a week, but when I finally returned, the mirror had returned, leaning innocuously against the wall, untouched. I dared not look at it directly. Instead, I caught glimpses out of the corner of my eye, and each time, I saw myself, older, worn, desperate, but not alone. Behind that version of me, countless others pressed, silhouettes writhing in darkness, waiting. I couldn't explain how, but I understood. The mirror wasn't just a reflection. It was a door, a window, a trap, showing realities that might be, that are, or that want me. I tried smashing it with a hammer, but the glass bent around my blows, flexing like liquid metal, and the whispers grew louder, demanding, pleading, promising. I left for a few days, stayed with friends, drank myself into exhaustion, but in every reflective surface, the spoon in the diner, the screen of my phone, even the tiny puddles in the street, I could see it, the other me, smiling knowingly, beckoning, warning, waiting. Now, I live with a mirror in the apartment, unable to remove it, unable to escape its gaze. I cover it at night, but it always finds a way to reveal itself in my dreams. Last night, I saw my reflection open its mouth, not to smile, not to speak, but to scream, and I swear I could hear it before I woke. I understand now that it isn't just showing me another reality. It's showing me all the ones I might slip into, all the versions of myself that exist, trapped, watching, waiting. I fear what will happen if it decides to pull me through. And yet, I can't stop looking. Sometimes when I stare too long, I think it might even step out, step into my world, and I no longer just me will step in with it. I've tried moving away, tried leaving, but when I close my eyes, the mirror is there in my mind, and sometimes in the corner of my vision, in places it shouldn't be, reflecting a reality that is almost but never quite my own. The last thing I saw before writing this, just an hour ago, was my reflection smiling. Not a friendly smile, but a knowing, hungry, inevitable smile, and slowly, impossibly, it winked. I never believed in the supernatural. Not really. Until the day I found the mirror at the estate sale of a woman who had died alone in a mansion no one had visited in decades. It was leaning against the wall in a dusty corner, covered with a threadbare sheet, its frame blackened and warped with age, the kind of ornate carvings that seemed to twist when you weren't looking directly at them. Something about it drew me in like a magnet, and though my friends teased me for buying it, I couldn't resist. I brought it home to my apartment, a small, otherwise ordinary space, thinking it would be a quirky decoration. At first, it was exactly that, a reflection, nothing more. But after a few nights, I began noticing that my reflection didn't always mirror me perfectly. Sometimes it lingered in places I hadn't been yet, or it blinked after I had, or it would smile when I felt nothing but anxiety. I shook it off as fatigue, a trick of the eyes, until one night, as I walked past it on my way to bed, I saw my reflection raise a hand to stop me. I froze, heart thudding, and for a moment, my reflection did something impossible. It stepped forward slightly, as if leaning out of the glass, eyes darker than mine, deeper, knowing things I didn't. I stumbled back and turned on the lights, but when I glanced again, it had returned to normal, innocent, a perfect mirror. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw glimpses of other realities through that glass. My apartment twisted, furniture shattered, the walls blackened as though scorched by something unseen, and me, screaming, running, unable to escape. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was just a dream, but when I passed the mirror, I noticed subtle differences. My reflection's clothes weren't exactly mine, and there was a faint, almost imperceptible scowl etched on my mirrored face. Then came the whispers, faint at first, low murmurs that seemed to seep from the frame, unintelligible, but somehow familiar, like someone reading my deepest thoughts aloud. I pressed my ear to the glass, and the whispers stopped immediately, replaced by silence so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. I started documenting the changes. My reflection moved a fraction of a second before or after I did, sometimes leaning toward me when I'd lean back, sometimes shaking its head when I was nodding. I began waking in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, to find the mirror glowing faintly. And for a moment, I could see an entire room behind it, dark, endless, filled with shadows moving in impossible ways. One night, I dared to touch it. My fingers brushed the surface, and it felt wrong, like water over glass, soft, alive, pulsating. A chill ran up my arm, and my reflection froze, staring at me with pure terror. Suddenly, a hand reached out from the glass. My hand, identical in every detail, and I felt a tug, a pressure pulling me forward. I yanked back, and the hand vanished, leaving me shaking, breathless, my heart hammering like a drum in my chest. After that, I could feel it watching me even when I wasn't near it. I would be cooking, cleaning, scrolling on my phone, and the hairs on my neck would rise, a sensation of eyes boring into my back. Sometimes in reflections on my TV or computer screen, I would catch a glimpse of it, standing behind me, smiling. I stopped inviting friends over. The apartment felt smaller, oppressive, as though the mirror itself was expanding, occupying more than its physical space. I began to hear footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate, pacing when no one was there. I started noticing shadows that didn't belong to me, moving independently. One evening, desperate, I covered the mirror with a thick blanket. That night, I awoke to the sound of scraping like fingernails on wood coming from the hallway. My heart leapt. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly lifted the blanket. The glass was bare, untouched, but my reflection wasn't alone. Behind me, a figure tall and faceless, draped in tattered black robes, loomed over my mirrored self. I jumped back, but when I glanced around the apartment, there was nothing, no figure, no movement, only the oppressive silence of my walls. Sleep became impossible. I would doze for an hour or two and awaken with the mirror reflecting something new. A version of my apartment destroyed, blood on the walls, broken furniture, and me, screaming silently. I tried reasoning with it, talking aloud, begging it to stop, to leave me alone, but the whispers never stopped, growing louder, chanting, teasing, demanding. Objects began moving on their own. My coffee cup slid across the counter as I watched. A book fell from the shelf in a perfect line to strike the floor just as my reflection looked at me expectantly. I realized it was playing, learning, observing, testing boundaries. Panic became a constant companion. I attempted to smash it one night with a hammer. The blows barely dented the glass. It rippled under each strike as though it were liquid metal, mocking me, and the whispers turned into laughter, high-pitched, metallic, echoing in every corner of the apartment. I fell back, bruised and sobbing, and the reflection smiled wider, reaching toward me. After that, I avoided it entirely, covering it during the day, hiding in other rooms at night, but the whispers persisted. They seeped into my dreams. I began to notice other realities through the corners of my eyes. A version of myself lying in bed, motionless, staring at the ceiling, eyes wide with horror. Another dragging themselves through broken glass. Another screaming, fleeing something invisible. I tried to destroy it chemically, with acid, with fire, but the mirror shrugged off every attempt. It always returned to its place, pristine, inescapable. The figure behind my reflection became bolder over time. First, it just watched. Then it began gesturing, pointing toward the walls, the ceiling, corners of rooms I hadn't noticed before. I started following its gestures, trying to anticipate it, but every action seemed to please it, and it always smiled afterward, patient, knowing. Eventually, I began hearing my own voice from the mirror, echoing threats I had never spoken, promises I hadn't made, in tones I couldn't recognize. I began to doubt my sanity completely. I stayed in darkness for hours, whispering to the reflection, asking questions, trying to communicate, but its answers were always incomprehensible murmurs, sometimes laughter, sometimes cries, sometimes silence, so heavy it pressed on my chest. One morning, I woke to find the apartment transformed subtly. Furniture shifted, doors leading to walls, shadows moved independently, and the mirror now reflected a version of the room I did not recognize. Peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, an enormous shadow crouched in a corner. My reflection waved at me. I froze. Then I saw it step forward, my reflection, leaving the glass behind, its feet touching the floor with a soft, impossible thud. I ran from the apartment, leaving everything behind, but in every reflective surface outside, store windows, puddles, even the shiny hood of a parked car. I saw it, standing where I wasn't, smiling, patient, waiting. I can't stop looking. Every night, I dream of it emerging fully into my world. I dream of being pulled into the mirror, disappearing, becoming part of its realm. Sometimes I wake drenched in sweat, with tiny scratches along my arms, as if something reached out while I slept. I've moved apartments twice since then, but it follows. I don't know why I kept the mirror after everything that happened, but I guess I should start from the beginning, because none of this will make sense unless I explain how ordinary everything was at first, how stupidly normal my life felt before the mirror made me question what was real and what wasn't. It started when my aunt died unexpectedly, leaving behind a huge, decaying farmhouse and a lifetime's worth of hoarded junk. I barely knew her. She was the family recluse, the one everyone described in hushed tones as odd, unwell, connected to things she shouldn't be. To me, she was just a stranger with my last name, but since I was the only living relative who didn't fight the will, I inherited everything. The cracked floors, the dust-choked rooms, the strange odors that seeped from the walls, and the old mirror in the attic that should have been smashed decades ago. I found it on my second day of sorting through her belongings, leaning upright in the corner of the attic behind a mountain of boxes, covered with sheets that smelled like mold and metal. The frame was iron, heavy, intricate, twisted into shapes that didn't follow any pattern I recognized, abstract contortions that almost looked like faces pressed into the surface from behind. The glass itself was tinted slightly darker than normal, giving my reflection a gloomy, sunken-eyed appearance. I remember laughing at my own reflection, joking aloud to myself that the mirror made me look like I hadn't slept in years. Maybe that was the moment something noticed me, something watching from the other side. Because that very night, things began to change. At first it was subtle. I'd walk past the mirror in the hallway, after I foolishly brought it home, and noticed that my reflection was half a second out of sync. Not a glitch in the corner of my eye, not imagination, something deliberate. A pause before mimicking me. A smile that lingered too long. Eyes that seemed to follow me even after I walked past. The first major incident happened 3 nights after I brought it home. I was brushing my teeth, exhausted after a long day of sorting through my aunt's hoarded nightmare, when I heard a faint tapping sound. At first I thought it was the pipes, but when I walked into the hallway, I realized the tapping was coming from the mirror. I stood there, frozen, toothbrush still in my mouth, listening to the steady tap-tap-tap from inside the glass, as though someone trapped behind it was knocking softly, politely, asking to be acknowledged. I stared at my reflection. My reflection stared back. The tapping stopped, and then my reflection blinked, slowly, deliberately, though I hadn't. I dropped the toothbrush. I slept on the couch that night, facing away from the hallway. But the tapping continued, soft, rhythmic, echoing faintly through the living room. The next day I tried convincing myself it was nothing. Stress. Fatigue. My aunt's creepy house messing with my head. But things escalated. The reflection began moving independently every time I caught it unexpectedly. Never when I looked directly at it for long, but in those tiny moments when my eyes shifted away. I'd see my reflection's arm move out of sync, or its head tilt when mine was still. Once, I swear I saw its lips form a word, though I didn't hear anything. I started covering the mirror with a blanket, but the blanket would always fall off by morning. I used tape, nails, rope, heavy furniture in front of it. Nothing stopped it. One morning, I woke to find the mirror leaning directly against my bedroom doorway, though I had left it in the hallway the night before. My reflection was awake even though I had just opened my eyes. Its eyes already locked onto mine, waiting, watching, hungry. I should have gotten rid of it then. Smashed it, burned it, anything. But an irrational fear controlled me. A fear that destroying it might be worse than leaving it alone, like provoking something I didn't understand. Over the next week, the line between reality and reflection began to blur. I started having dreams, vivid, impossible nightmares where my reflection stepped out of the mirror, slowly, silently, crawling on all fours like something that had forgotten how to use a human body. It would creep up to my bed, its breath cold on my face, its movements jerky and uncoordinated, its grins stretching too wide to be human. Sometimes it whispered to me in a voice that wasn't a voice, more like an echo bouncing inside my skull. "Let me in. You don't belong there. Trade places." I'd jolt awake, drenched in sweat, but the dreams clung to me like static electricity. Worse, each morning I found my blanket slightly pulled back, as if someone or something had been standing over me. One night, I woke to the sound of my own voice, coming from the hallway. I froze. The voice sounded exactly like me. Same tone, same inflection, same quiet irritation I would have if someone woke me at 3 a.m. It spoke again. "I know you're awake." My blood ran cold. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. "Come here." The voice whispered again. "It's important." I stayed in bed, shaking violently, until dawn. When I finally got the courage to check the hallway, everything was silent. But the mirror was uncovered again, and my reflection was smiling with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. The next day, I noticed something disturbing. My reflection's clothing didn't match mine anymore. I'd be wearing a black shirt, but the reflection wore a gray one. I turned my head slowly, trembling, and I watched as my reflection, unsynchronized, delayed its response, then abruptly snapped into the correct pose. But the clothes remained wrong. I whispered to the reflection, "What are you?" It smiled wider. That night, the shadows in the mirror began shifting. Not reflections, actual shadows behind my reflection, moving with purpose. Something was behind me in that alternate space. Something tall, something humanoid, something that shook the entire reality within the mirror as it moved. I remember screaming out loud, "Stay away from me." To my horror, my reflection didn't react. It just watched me, head cocked slightly, as the shadows behind it grew larger and more defined. Later that night, I woke to find myself standing in front of the mirror with no memory of getting out of bed. My hands were pressed against the glass, and the glass was warm. My reflection mimicked me perfectly this time, but it was smiling wider than my face could stretch. I stumbled back and fell onto the hallway floor, but my reflection didn't mimic the fall. It stood there, head lowering toward the glass as if peering down at me. That was the night I decided to leave the house entirely. I checked into a motel, drove without looking into the rearview mirror, avoided every reflective surface. I lasted 2 days before the inevitable happened. I was brushing my teeth in the motel bathroom when the mirror flickered, and instead of showing the dingy motel behind me, it showed my aunt's farmhouse hallway. And behind my mirrored self, something huge was standing, its shape contorted, limbs bending at unnatural angles, its presence radiating malice. I dropped everything and ran out of the bathroom. I slept on the motel floor that night, away from every reflective surface. But the dreams continued. In them, my reflection was closer each time, its whispers louder, its intentions clearer. "We belong together. Let me replace you. You don't deserve this side." On the 5th night, I woke to find a full handprint on the inside of my motel bathroom mirror. A handprint that wasn't mine. I fled back to the farmhouse. Don't ask why, I don't know myself. Maybe because some instinct told me the mirror was tied to that place, that maybe I could end it there. When I arrived, the house was colder than before. Silent, heavy with dread. The mirror was exactly where I left it. Waiting. I stared into it for a long time. My reflection stared back, but something was different. It wasn't smiling. It looked almost desperate. It shook its head slowly, eyes wide with warning. My mouth went dry. "What?" I whispered. "What do you want me to do?" My reflection lifted a trembling finger and pointed behind me. I froze. I felt something warm, damp, breathing, standing at my back. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. But the air grew colder as it leaned closer. The smell of rotting earth filled my lungs. My reflection began screaming silently, pounding on the inside of the glass. I finally forced myself to turn. For a moment, there was nothing, just the empty hallway stretching into darkness. But when I looked back at the mirror, my reflection wasn't there. The hallway in the reflection was empty too. Just void, silent, waiting. Then, slowly, my reflection stepped into view from the side of the mirror's frame. Except I hadn't moved. And it wasn't alone. Something enormous followed behind it, hunched, its hands dragging along the floor, its void-like face fixed directly on me. I stumbled backward, but the reflection moved closer, pressing its palms to the glass. The thing behind it pressed its own massive hand over my reflections, dwarfing it, and the glass began to ripple, like water, like a doorway being unlocked. I screamed and ran out of the house. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I drove until my hands stopped trembling enough to steer. I'm in a different apartment now, a new place with no old furniture, no relics, no heirlooms. But every mirror I've looked into since shows slight delays, slight distortions. Sometimes my reflection smiles when I don't. Sometimes its eyes look too dark, too aware. Last night, my bathroom mirror showed a hallway I didn't recognize, the hallway from the farmhouse. And standing at the far end was my reflection, motionless, staring at me across realities. And behind it, that thing, growing clearer, closer, hungrier. I think the mirror followed me. Or maybe the mirror was never the object at all. Maybe the mirror is me. And maybe the thing isn't trying to cross over. Maybe it's waiting for me to come back. And I'm terrified because sometimes, when I'm tired, when I'm half asleep, when I'm not paying attention, I feel an urge to step toward the glass. A pull, a longing, as if something inside the mirror wants to trade places. And worse, some nights I want